All right, well, welcome back, everybody, to our second session this morning. And we're covering still in the book of Genesis. We're in the great epic, the great drama of the book of Genesis. I'm so enjoying this story and Joseph and his family. So we are continuing Genesis chapter 46 and 47 today. We'll, Lord willing, get through both of these chapters this morning. Let me give you a quick overview of what we're going to look at. Well, of course, Genesis 46 is going to detail the Jacob and his whole family now. Remember, his name's Israel. So all of Israel moving to Egypt during a famine, with God reassuring Jacob that he would be protected and become a great nation while he's there. Israel and Joseph, so that's father and son, have a very emotional reunion. In chapter 47, we'll see that it's going to describe the family settlement in Goshen, a very plenteous area, and Joseph's presentation of his family to Pharaoh, which is interesting, and Joseph's administrative actions during the famine as he was put in charge of this area of the famine in Egypt. And this is going to lead the Egyptians to sell their land and themselves to Pharaoh in exchange for food. So this is a lot to cover in one session, but let's go ahead and dive in. Now, I will just say this from the outset here, that a portion of what we're going to read today is the begats, is some genealogies. And we will go through them. There's some interesting things in there, but hang with me. This is we'll go through these words today, these stories today. But the very first breakdown we have five major parts we're going to look at. Here's the first one, is in these first 27 verses, basically is about Jacob's journey to Egypt. I think we remember where we are in the story. In the story, we have Joseph was sold into slavery. He made his way down into Egypt. Remember, he was there in prison for a time. Then he was kept 2 years longer. And before he was brought back up, finally he meets up with Pharaoh. He interprets dreams. And he tells Pharaoh that there is a coming famine. 7 good years, 7 bad years. There's a famine coming, and he's to appoint somebody that's full of wisdom. And Pharaoh says, I know just the guy, it's you. And so Joseph is now promoted and in charge of not just Potiphar, which was a captain of the guard, captain in charge of the defense of Egypt, but now he's been promoted even further, and he's basically second in command of the entire Egyptian rule. So we find ourselves there. Now, Joseph's family comes there for food. We've looked at in the last couple of chapters. Joseph has blessed them, and through a series of tests that he's given them, he knows he can trust them now. And he has now sent for his own father and all of his family and all of their families to come and move into Egypt to be taken care of. So now we have the idea of Jacob knowing he's probably on his deathbed, trying to make this journey from Canaan all the way into Egypt. So Jacob now is an old guy. He's 130 years old, and he believes he's in his last couple of days here and can't really make this trip more than once, and he's not sure. Now, here's the little secret. He's going to live another 17 years. Okay, so he's not on his deathbed. Jacob's thinking he's on his deathbed the last several years now, and he's living much longer. So, don't give up quite yet. Jacob lived longer. So here's the story of Jacob, his journey to Egypt. Let's begin in verse number 1. So Israel, that is Jacob, Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father, Isaac. Then God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. So he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again. And Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. Then Jacob arose from Beersheba. The sons of Israel, that's his own children, the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob, their little ones, and their wives in the carts which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. Remember those carts full of food he sent just last time when they came back from Joseph. Verse 6, so they took their livestock and their goods, which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and went to Egypt, Jacob and all his descendants with him. His sons and his sons' sons, his daughters and his sons and daughters, and all his descendants he brought with him to Egypt. To Egypt. Let's go ahead and pause just for a moment there. I want to point out just a couple of things as we're going through this section. First of all, I want you to notice that they stopped at Beersheba. Beersheba was already a place that we've been learning about in in our study walkthrough of our book of Genesis. Remember, Abraham in Genesis 21:33 already had a vision there, and so did Isaac in Genesis 26. So this has been a place that now Abraham, Isaac, and now Jacob has received a vision from the Lord, really reaffirming this idea that through one man, this is Abraham, and through his lineage, the world would be blessed through this lineage. Of course, we know as Christians, the primary reason we say this is because it was the singular seed of Abraham, that is Jesus. Those of you who are following our remnant, you understand the importance of this now. The Understanding the Remnant series we're doing, if you go back and watch some of that. Because now this remnant, is the faithful remnant, is found in one person. Yes, it's the family of Abraham was used, but really we understand the seed of Abraham is fulfilled really in the Messiah, Jesus Christ of Nazareth. So this whole story, as Jesus said on those men that he was walking with on the road to Emmaus, he opened up the scriptures and he told them things out of Moses and of the prophets in Jesus' words. These are the things concerning me. This is the story of Jesus. So the story of Abraham being reassured at Beersheba, there would be one coming through his lineage, Jesus, and then Isaac, same thing, Jesus, and now Jacob, Beersheba, same place. So on his way to Egypt, God reaffirms the Abrahamic covenant through this dream and this vision to Jacob, whose name is now Israel. The second thing I want to point out in these first 7 verses is I want to point out that now we have a little bit of, again, if you're joining us in our study on understanding the remnant, look at verse number 5 for those of you who are following along. Now you see a little bit of the confusion here. So we have here, then Jacob, and then it says, of Israel. Now that's the same person. This is this person. But you see in the biblical text, do you see how confusing that is? Let me ask you a question. You've gone word by word with me in Genesis if you're following along. Simple question. Is Israel a nation at this point? Not a chance. Not even close. Not been offered to be a nation. All we know is there's a guy named Jacob, and God has changed his name to Israel after he wrestled with him. Israel means, we think, it's kind of a vague term, it means something like one who wrestles with God. Jacob's name's been changed. But do you see how the confusion has already started? Then Jacob arose from Beersheba, and the sons of who? Jacob. What does Moses call it? Israel. Why does he call them both so close to each other when they're not a nation yet? Because remember, Moses has a pen in his hand writing this down, and Moses is in Egypt. Well, by now he's out, but he grew up in Egypt. And now Moses is trying to make sure you, the reader, is connecting the dots that his name has been changed to Israel. But they haven't been a nation yet. That didn't happen until Moses' day. So he's kind of highlighting this for you to not miss the storyline. But do you see how it's starting to be used in a confusing fashion almost? That's why our understanding the remnant story teaching is so important. All right? The next section we have is 8 through 25. Let's go ahead and read together. Now, these were the names of the children of Israel. Now, we're going to read some names here, but these are actually broken up. These are actually organized. You're going to see the names of Jacob's children, and it's organized through the wives that he had. So we'll go ahead and read through here, but try to track this as much as you can. It's a lot of names. At the end, I'll point out some interesting things, okay? So here's the names of the children of Israel. Jacob and his sons who went into Egypt. Well, Reuben was Jacob's firstborn. The sons of Reuben were Hanok, Pilu, Hezron, Carmi. The sons of Simeon. So now we're on to a different son. Do you see how that's organized? We just mentioned Reuben, and now we're on to Simeon. So try to understand this if you can through these sons that are being mentioned, and then it's their children being mentioned. Okay, so it gets a little confusing, but you can follow that way. The sons of Simeon were Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, Shual, the son of the Canaanite woman. The sons of Levi were Gershon, Kohath, Merari, verse 12. The sons of Judah were Onan, Shelah, Perez. And by the way, Perez, that's the one that we want to keep our eye on because it's through Perez that Jesus is born. Remember, he's the lion of the tribe of Judah. And then Judah's lineage that brings about Jesus is through Perez. So we want to kind of always highlight that in our mind, that line. And Zerah, But and Onan died in the land of Canaan. The sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. The sons of Issachar, yes, Issachar, by the way, side note here, just a quick bit of reading Hebrew in English. When you see a CH in English, but you're in the Old Testament, it's a hard K sound. So this is not Issachar, it's Issachar. And the sons of Issachar, so it's the brook, it's the brook of Kerith. Okay, not Cherith. The sons of Issachar were Tola, Puva, Job, and Shimron. Did you notice a name in there? Now, some people think this actually is Job of the book of Job. I have no way to say yes or no, but I will say that it's the right time period. I think Job probably lived a little earlier. We have no way of knowing if this is the Job or not. I will say this, if this is the Job of the book of Job, then I will say that we don't know how on earth he got all the way where he was. I mean, he's in a different place. So that means he would have left his family, started his own family, but the Bible describes him as being righteous. So it would seem to me that this is a different person and probably not the same one, but some have made that connection and I have no way to know yes or no other than it doesn't seem to connect to me. But anyway, the sons of Zebulun were Sered, Elon, and Jaleel. These were the sons of Leah. So now we're organizing those sons under Leah, the heading of Leah. So there is organization to this. These were the sons of Leah whom she bore to Jacob in Paddan Aram, and his daughter Dinah. All the persons and his sons and his daughters were 33. The sons of Gad were Siphion, Haggai, Shinu, Esbon, Eri, Erodi, and Areli. The sons of Asher were Jemnah, Ishua, Isui, Beriah, Sirah, and their sister. The sons of Beriah were Eber and Malchaleel. I'm sure I'm butchering these. These were the sons of Zilpah, and Laban gave to Leah his daughter, and these she bore to Jacob, 16 persons. The sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife, were Joseph and Benjamin. You see a much shorter list when we get to Leah. It's just Joseph and Benjamin. Now, it says here in verse 20, and in Joseph, in the land of Egypt, were born Manasseh and Ephraim. This is important because when we see the 12 sons of Jacob, we see the names of the tribes. Joseph is broken up into two half-tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. They're called the half-tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim. Half-tribe of Manasseh, half-tribe of let me say that again. Half-tribe of Manasseh and the half-tribe of Ephraim make up one tribe, and that is representation of Joseph's children. So we'll make more sense of that later. And Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. Verse 21. The sons of Benjamin were Bela, Becher, Ashabel, Gira, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Muppin, and Huppin. I think they just got bored at that point. You have so many kids, you start, What was the last one named? Mumpim? Okay, you're Humpim. I don't know. Huppim and Ard. These were the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob, 14 persons in all. We'll come back to that in a moment. We'll make some comment there. The sons of Dan were Hushim. Oh, that's the cousin of... Anyway, you can put it all together. The sons of Naphtali were Jaziel, Guni, Jezer, and Shillem. These were the sons of Bilhah, and whom Laban gave to Rachel, his daughter. She bore these to Jacob, 7 persons in all. Okay, so here's the bottom line here, verse 26 and 27. All the persons who went with Jacob to Egypt, who came from his body, besides Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2 persons. All the persons of the house of Jacob who went to Egypt were 70. Okay, we say all that to say there's 70 people that we can say are from Israel or from Jacob. Don't get confused on that. Are 70 people starting off the time Jacob comes down here. A couple of things to note as we go through here. First of all, we learn in verse 12, this is from your handout, that Judah had 2 children die in Canaan. That's significant. We didn't know that. And also, he's now become a grandfather. Judah is a grandfather now. We've only really been talking about his children, but now young Judah is a grandfather on this list. Another significant thing that we see is young Benjamin. Remember Benjamin? We've been talking about him the whole time. Who's your youngest? Bring your youngest. And Jacob's going, oh, he's just a lad. He can't go. That little lad is somewhere around 22 or 23 years old at this point. Did you notice? Benjamin has 10 kids. Yeah. You think you have pressure. This 23-year-old has 10 kids. Now, how does that happen? Well, it doesn't even mention any second wife or anything. It's my guess, and I have no way of knowing this. It's my guess there's probably, hopefully for his sake, some triplets maybe in the list. Hopefully at least twins. But that's the data. You can figure it out on your own. The data is the guy's 23 years old, and we listed 10 kids. So young Benjamin, welcome to the world. You are now in charge of a lot of people here. All right. The next thing I want to point out to you in this listing is that there's about 70 people total from this list who goes into Egypt. So we want to make sure we know that number pretty well. And remember, there's 70 in this list. And actually, I have one more verse to get to here in verse 28. Oh, no, I listed that twice. Our next section, 28 through 34, is Jacob is now settling in Goshen. Okay, that's through the part. Let's get to the story. All right, 28. Then he sent Judah, that is his father. Jacob sent Judah. And why not? He's a grandfather now. Sorry, I said throw that in there. He sent Judah before him to Joseph to point out before him the way to Goshen. And they came to the land of Goshen. So Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father, Israel. Let's pause for just a moment because we're getting into one of the most highly emotional scenes in all of this. Now remember what we're talking about. Jacob has not seen Joseph yet. And Joseph, I don't know if you remember this or not, but there's no text messaging yet. There's no emails yet. Okay, and so they didn't even have the Pony Express yet, right? There's no Morse code. So I can imagine that Joseph is probably looking out every day, seeing who's there. Finally, one day, he sees Judah run ahead. And Judah's run ahead to get Joseph's attention and says, Dad's on his way. So Joseph sees this, and Joseph makes himself ready. He makes ready his chariot. Could you imagine last time his dad saw him? Every son has inside of them that they want their father to be proud of them. And Joseph was considered to be dead, and now he's making ready his chariot. Can you imagine making ready your chariot to go see your father you've not seen? For a long time, a couple of decades. So Joseph is making ready his chariot, it says in verse number 29, to go to Goshen to meet his father, Israel. And he presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Let's just take a moment to consider and let these words just kind of permeate. You can see this idea of being separated from your son for this long. From Jacob's perspective, seeing your son you haven't seen for such a long time. From Joseph's perspective, and man, they just stayed there in the moment for a little while. They let that moment just sit there, and they had nothing to do but just to embrace one another. And it says in verse 29 that Joseph fell on Jacob's neck and wept on his neck a good while. 30 through 34, Israel says to Joseph, I can kind of imagine they sort of let go of their embrace, and Jacob probably says the typical thing that a father does, let me get a good look at you here, you know. And he finally says to Joseph, he says, I'll tell you what, now let me die since I've seen your face because you're still alive. He says to his son, he says, you know what? My life is totally fulfilled now. The last thing I had on my checklist was to see you. And now I've seen you. He's saying to Joseph, there's nothing left for me to accomplish. All of my family is here. You know, I know I'm not exactly an old man at this point, but I will tell you this. Every year that goes by in my life, if I have all of my kids under one roof now, and I have everybody together, I don't need anything else. You know, you remember when you were little and you'd give presents to your parents? And they would say, just you being here is good enough. Or you'd make them some terrible coloring thing or cut something out, and they go, I just love it. And there's a time period where you really believed that, And then you got older and you were, maybe an older child, maybe just a preteen, and you realized, boy, I made them trash for years, and they loved it. They were lying to me. And you went through that time where you said, well, I guess they were just trying to be nice to me, but this is garbage I've been giving them. And then you get older and you realize, oh, and then there's another phase. You're like, they really did love it. I'm at that phase now where we don't have grandchildren yet, but my children are starting to get old enough to, go have their own lives and become adults and all of that. And Sarah and I are talking. We're like, wow, what's this grandparent thing going to be like when we can do that one day? And I'll tell you, man, when I see that little grandson or that granddaughter, and they say, Grandpa, I made you this, it will be beautiful. And I will say the same thing as Joseph here, the same thing as Jacob. Say, man, I have all my family under one roof. I don't need anything else. There's no other checklist for me. And those are the kind of emotions that Jacob is saying to Joseph. He's saying, I saw you. What's left? What else could there be? I have my family with me, and I never thought I'd see you again. Oh, this tops them all. I thought you were dead, and now you're alive. This tops them all. There's nothing else that I need. You can just let me die now. Now, it seems like to me as I read this, there's a lot of times that Jacob is saying he's about to die. Now, I don't know if it's because... Now, remember, at this point, Jacob is 130 years old. Now, people in his family have lived much, much longer than that. But according to Jacob, he'd been through a lot, and I think he probably feels like this aged him much faster. But between you and I, and Moses, who penned this here, as we're stuck in the middle of the story, just between me and you, he's going to live another 17 years after this. Although he probably feels like he's ready to die now. Verse 31 tells us Joseph's response. Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and those of my father's house who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for their occupation has been to feed livestock. And they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. So it shall be when Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? That you shall say, your servant's occupation has been with livestock from our youth, even till now, both we and also our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. This is one of the keys to us understanding this passage. So if you've tuned out, try to tune back in here, because this is one of our keys for understanding this passage. Joseph is doing some prep work here. He's prepping his brothers on a business meeting they're about to have. He says, okay, guys, first things first, I'm about to go tell my boss, the guy that kind of like rules the world right now. I'm going to go tell Pharaoh that you're here. And I'm going to go tell him that you guys all are sheep herders, that you're shepherds, that you guys take care of livestock, which they all had. That's been in their family. Remember the story of Jacob, knowing how to make Laban's flock very strong. This is in their blood. They know this. This has been their family line. This is their family trait. So this is what they do. He said, but make sure you say that you're shepherds. But he says, and here's the key to this thing, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. The question we have here is, why is that the case? Does nobody in Egypt take care of sheep? Why are these shepherds an abomination to the Egyptians? And we can kind of take a guess at that. There's several different reasons why this could be true, but I'll give you what I think is probably the right answer. And that is specifically those kind of shepherds that are specifically from Jacob's family, an Israeli shepherd. They would not only tend to their flock, but they would also kill them to appease their God. Right? It's a sacrificial system. It's a bloody system. While those in Egypt, they would hold cattle very sacred, almost to the point of worshiping cattle. So it was an abomination for you to go out and take care of your cattle, only to take care of them, only to kill them, to be able to offer a sacrifice to the Lord. That's probably, I think, what's going on here. Now, these shepherds were an abomination in Egypt. So he's saying, just say that you're a shepherd. You can live in Goshen, because Goshen was off the beaten path. It was a plenteous area, but it was not near all the commerce. It was not near the metropolis. And so Goshen is off the beaten path. It's plenteous. And in Joseph's mind, this is perfect because you're a shepherd. So his thinking, I think, is Pharaoh is going to want to reward or honor Joseph by allowing his family to be here. But tell them you're a shepherd. Make sure he knows that because you have all this cattle. He'll want you to go to Goshen because it's away from everything. But I'm telling you, that's the best thing for you. So that's the pep talk. So I hope you're following what's going on here. Our next section is verses 1 through 12 in chapter 47. And this is going to be Pharaoh's conversation with Joseph's family. I hope this is playing out to you like a movie because that's how I see it in my head. Verses 1 and 2. We'll read 1 through 6. Then Joseph went and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brothers, their flocks and their herds and all that they possess have come from the land of Canaan. And indeed they are in the land of Goshen. And he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. We'll just comment on verse 2 real quick. That is to say, Joseph chose 5 of his brothers to come with him to give him a sampling of the 70 people. So these 5 are representative of the 70 that are in Goshen. Verse 3, then Pharaoh said to his brothers, that is the 5 that were there, well, what's your occupation? Just as Joseph said he would say. And they said to Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds, both we and are also our fathers. Just as Joseph, they hit it out of the park. They did what they were supposed to. Verse 4, then they said to Pharaoh, we have come to dwell in the land because your servants have no pasture for their flocks. For the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now therefore, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. Then Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, saying, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Have your father and your brothers dwell in the best of the land. Let them dwell in the land of Goshen. And if you know any competent men among them, then make them chief herdsmen over my livestock. This is absolutely incredible. Verse 7, then Joseph brought in their father Jacob to set him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. We're going to get to this in just a moment. But in verses 1 through 6, this is really amazing because not only did the brothers get to stay in Goshen, but also one of them apparently got hired. I mean, one of them got hired directly working underneath Pharaoh. This is such a compliment to Joseph because they would never have ever dreamed of hiring somebody from Canaan to do a job for Pharaoh if it weren't for the high respect that Pharaoh had for Joseph. He said, well, why don't you pick out one of the best ones here and let them work and they can be in charge of all of my cattle as well. Absolutely amazing how much they trusted, how much Pharaoh trusted Joseph. Verses 7 through 12, Joseph brought in his father Jacob and set him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Jacob, how old are you? How rude. Verse 9, and Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of my years of my life. They have not attained the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. I'm going to pause there for a moment and kind of unpack this because this is a little confusing on the wording. I don't know if you read that and got that first try, but I had to read that about 20 times to make sure I understood that. In verse number 9, well, first of all, let's back up because there's a lot here. In verse number 7 is super, super significant. So if you underline, star, put an arrow, my dad puts an arrow so big next to portions of his Bible that you can see what he likes. This is one of those verses. If you mark your Bible or you make taking notes, verse 7 is significant. Because Joseph brought his father Jacob before Pharaoh. Now, in the eyes of Pharaoh, in the eyes of the Egyptians, Pharaoh had achieved godhood. He had achieved deity. So Pharaoh was a lowercase g god to these people. He was one of many. Now they had lots of gods, but Pharaoh was really the incarnate God for them. So Pharaoh ran everything as a god. And here's a 130-year-old man who keeps talking about his own death, and he blesses Pharaoh in verse 7. Apparently Pharaoh accepts it. Pharaoh has humbled himself enough Because you see the pattern in the Bible is that the stronger blesses the weaker. And so here we see that Jacob is blessing Pharaoh. This means that in this passage right here, that there's two ideas I wanted to convey to you. I have in your handout. One idea is that Jacob represented the true God over the Egyptian gods. And so Jacob is a monotheist. This is what set Israel apart. Remember we talked about Pastor Bob in our study of the understanding the remnant? What set Israel apart as the pastor nation to the nations? The big difference was the nations were all pagan. That is to say, all the other places in the world all believed that there was a God for this and a God for this and a God for this. They believed in multiplicity of gods. Israel was different in the sense that they believed in one God, Yahweh. That's it. Creator God had a personal relationship with them. They're monotheists. Everybody else is polytheist. So Jacob here is saying there's only one God. What does that mean by definition to Pharaoh? By the way, you're not a God either. But I want to bless you according to the name of the definite article, the Lord God. And apparently Pharaoh receives this blessing. So this is a significant verse. But the first thing is Jacob represented the true God over the Egyptian gods. And second thing I want to convey is that Pharaoh humbled himself to allow Jacob to bless him. But you have to understand, by accepting this blessing, the blessing from God, that means this God acknowledged God. It's a significant verse, right? So as we work our way through, Pharaoh looks up to Jacob. He goes, "So how old are you, man? Like, how old are you?" This is the response. Let me just kind of use the screen here because this gets a little bit confusing. He says, "The days of my pilgrimage," that means that's how old I am, and he calls his life a journey. I've been on this journey 130 years. That's what I'm 130 years old. Okay, so far that's what we have. He says, "Few and evil." Now this word evil is interesting because it has different shades of meaning with it. And evil oftentimes in this context will be used as suffering or maybe violence or difficulty or trial. That's what he's not saying that he's an evil guy and he's been an evil guy for 130 years. He's saying that the years have been few and difficult. That's what he's saying. Evil. There's been a lot of suffering. He says, "Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life." And so they says, they, that is the years, they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers. So what he's saying is, I'm not as old as them. They lived much older than me. But if you're wondering why I'm prematurely aging so quickly, I know this 130-year-old, I know what you're thinking. Wow, he looks 250. I know, that's because life's been so hard on me. My father's lived a lot longer. Even though I look like I'm 250, I'm only 130 because my life has been very difficult compared to theirs. That's what he's saying. So I know that's a very wordy and strange, but that's the whole thing there. Okay, verse number 10. So Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before the Lord. I like how in verse number 7 we learn that Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and then in verse number 10 we learn that, because I think this is just me thinking, okay? When we look at verse number 7, Joseph brought his father to Jacob and set him before Pharaoh. Jacob blesses Pharaoh. Moses, writing this down, Moses is our author here. Moses knows that's a very, very important thing to say. Very significant. Remember, Moses is the one that has the exodus out of Egypt. If anybody understood Egyptian culture, it's Moses, like more than anybody else. So he knows the significance of this, but he also knows this is a very interesting conversation in verses 8 and 9. And after that interesting conversation is over again, look what he reiterates. So he wants you to really leave off that with the last thought, that Jacob blessed Pharaoh. So I try to look for those patterns because you know what the author is emphasizing. You know what's important to him. Okay. And Joseph, verse 11, situated his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Then Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with bread, according to the number of their families. Our next section here begins chapter 47 or continues chapter 47, verses 13 through 26. Joseph deals with the famine. Our focus is now going to switch from this conversation of Joseph welcoming his family. Now we're going to see him in his administrative acts, and really we're going to look at his on-the-job work here. Okay, so our focus shifts a little bit. There was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt, in the land of Canaan, for the grain which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. So the money which failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread, for why should we die in your presence? For the money has failed." And Joseph said, verse 16, "Give your livestock, and I will give you bread for your livestock if the money is gone." So, verse 17, they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the cattle, and the herds, and all the donkeys, and for the donkeys. Thus he fed them with bread in exchange for all their livestock that year. So basically, Joseph is trying to make it work between the government and the people. I mean, he's trying to be a go-between. He's trying to, as we say in football, he's running an audible here. Come and buy some grain. That's the plan. Well, we have no more money. Is this the end of the system? Do we just die now because we've given you all our money? And Joseph says, no, we'll barter. We'll take the cattle as well. And so now he's doing cattle for this sort of money. I have in your handout, Joseph accepted cattle in the place of money in exchange for food. And I have just put this here because this is Moses' whole point. He is enriching Pharaoh at this point. Pharaoh is becoming stronger than ever because of Joseph being in charge of the food, because of the proper interpretation of the dream. This is a lot like God blessing Laban on behalf of Jacob's case for his cattle. Very similar. 18 through 26, let's read together. And when that year had ended, they came to him the next year and said, "We will not hide from my Lord that our money is gone. My Lord also has our herds of livestock. There's nothing left in sight of my Lord but our bodies and our land." So the next year they come back and said, "Our money's gone, and you've already taken all of our livestock. We're all going to die. We had 1 year's worth of famine still going on. Look, this is what I own. You're looking at it, this and wherever I live." Verse 19, "Why should we die before your eyes, before both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be the servants of Pharaoh. Give us seed that we may live and not die, and the land may not be desolate." Then Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, and every man and of the Egyptians sold his field because the famine was severe upon them. So the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he moved them into the cities, from one end of the borders of Egypt to the other end. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had rations allotted to them by Pharaoh. They ate their rations, which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore, they did not sell their land. Then Joseph, verse 23, said to the people, "Indeed, I have bought you and your land this day for Pharaoh. Look, here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. It shall come to pass in the harvest that you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh. 4/5 shall be your own, as the seed of your field and for your food, and of those of your household, and as food for your little ones." Then they said, "You have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants." And Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt to this day, that is at the time of the writing of this by Moses, that Pharaoh should have 1/5 except for the land of the priests only, which did not become Pharaoh's. Oh boy, there is so much here. I know we're doing huge chunks of scripture, so there's a lot here. I just got to keep reading and then make comment on it. But this is what I have in your handout to try and help this to make sense and shake it down. So as the famine got worse, the individuals sold their land to Pharaoh. Joseph moved them out of the country and into cities. And I would just say this as we're reading this. I hope you're making this connection. This is much like our own country. I hope you're seeing that. I don't know the percentages, so I'm not going to pretend to guess here, But I know there was a large percentages of Americans at the founding of our country would be consider themselves some type of farmer. As compared to now, that percentage has been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And as that number shrinks and people sell their farmland, they move into what we would call a city. And as you lose your private property and the ability to take care of yourself, you're more dependent on government. And that has been a pattern we've seen throughout our country. And that's what's happening in Egypt. Is this farmland, they're saying this is all we have. Okay, sell it. And where did Joseph move them to? Into the city. Now you're more dependent on the system. There was a quote that I couldn't find a for sure person to attribute it to, so I'll go ahead and just say it to you. Possibly Ben Franklin, but it's unknown. It's, if each man had an acre of land, there would be no more tyrants. What that means is, if I have an acre of land and I have seed, I can provide for my family and perpetually be okay. I'm not dependent on anybody. But if I have no land, I can't make sure that my family's okay. I'm dependent on the government to provide for me, or at least a system, and that system's dependent on the government. So it's a very interesting thing that's happening here in the land of Egypt. This finishes up in 27 through 31, Joseph's vow to Jacob. Now we are really preparing for his death here. Okay. So Israel dwelt, that is, Israel is Jacob and all of those 70 people that are now more people. Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt in the country of Goshen. They had possessions there and grew and multiplied exceedingly. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, so 130 to 147. The length of Jacob's life was 147. When the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "Now if I have found favor in your sight, please put your hand under my thigh and deal kindly and truly with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. You shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place." And he said, "I will do as you have said." And then he said, "Swear to me." And he swore to him. So Israel bowed himself on the head of the bed. Now, that closes this chapter, but a couple of interesting things in these last few verses. One is that when Joseph is making an oath with his father, and he says this very interesting thing that we don't say anymore. He says, "Put your hand under my thigh and deal kindly and truly with me." This is an ancient, at least Israeli way of making an oath. Now, there has been much made of this. What exactly is being done here? I don't know. It's so far removed from me and my culture, I'm not sure what this means. However, I believe it probably has something to do, when he says under my thigh, I think it probably has something to do with the idea of remember where you came from. The idea that, remember, God made a covenant with us for generations. So I can probably just say it this way. Under the thigh is probably a very private place that you wouldn't offer a lot of people to touch to make an oath with you. And I think in a lot of ways, Jacob is saying to him, don't forget where you came from and don't forget what God is doing through our family. That's my take on that, and you can have some fun studying that on your own, okay? But one other thing that's interesting to me is he says here, don't let me be buried here in Egypt. I want you to carry me to the land of Canaan. I don't want to be buried in Egypt. Now, this will bring us over into our life application, and I'll answer a little bit more of that on our study questions in a moment. Here's what I got out of these two chapters this week. A lot, right? The experience of life may be summarized as a time which consists of constant change, often uncomfortable change. I'll just pause there for a moment. Did you know that when your life stops changing, I think everybody says that change is hard. You're used to going to the same job, you're used to driving the same car, you're used to having the same neighbor. Yeah, you have that neighbor that's a good neighbor, you work well with your neighbor, and then they move and somebody else comes in, you're like, oh, I gotta start over. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's not. Change is always uncomfortable. But did you know when your life stops changing, that means that you've died? Life is change. So here's what I'm taking out of these two chapters. Our job from all this change is to trust God during each and every change, trusting that He knows more than us and loves us. These changes are difficult on familial relationships. We must love each other by displaying patience. We're all in a different emotional and spiritual levels at any given time in life. God will reward families which choose to listen more than speak, try to understand more than attack, and love more than gossip. And here's a prayer that I just kind of had for my own self this week. Lord, calm my heart as I go through the changes of life. Help me to believe that you know more than me. I want to believe that. I know that, but I want to believe that all the time. Help me to be patient and treat others in a way that glorifies your name. Okay? Now let's go to our study questions this week, 1 through 27. What did God tell Jacob to not fear when he appeared to him in a vision? Well, in verses 3 and 4, God tells Israel to not fear to go down to Egypt because he would make him a great nation there. But I want to add, I'll say this at the end. Next question, 28 through 34. Jacob stated that he was now ready to die because he saw what? Joseph's face. All right. 47, 1 through 12. In your opinion, what significant event happened in verse 7? Well, we hit that pretty hard in this session. Jacob represented the God, Yahweh, the God of his fathers, and Pharaoh was a god in Egypt. 13 through 26. Who was exempt from the law which Joseph made? I didn't say this clearly, and I'm glad I put this in the study questions to remind me. The priests, because they were already on the land which Pharaoh gave them. In other words, he made a law that everything that you got from your land, you could keep 80% of it. 4/5 were yours to keep. So Joseph instituted not a communistic idea where the government controls everything. He says, no, 80% is yours. Give Pharaoh back 20%. But then this didn't apply to the priests at all. And the question is why? And the answer is in the text. It's because the priests were already on the government dole. Okay, the priests were already Pharaoh already gave them land. He already controlled them. The priests worked at his behest. That's why the priests in Israel were different. The priests from Israel didn't work for a government. They worked straight for God. The temple system, how I always say, no temple, no system. This is what makes Israel's temple system different. The priests around the world, they worked at the government's behest. And so this makes it very, very different as we're going through our study here. And lastly, verses 27 through 31. How long did Jacob live in Egypt? Well, he lived there until his death, which was 17 years, 130 to 147. How many years did the famine have left when he arrived? I think it was 5. I forgot to double check that. But also, in your opinion, and this is an interesting question, in your opinion, where should his family have multiplied exceedingly? In other words, should they have gone there just for the food and left? Or when he stayed there for 17 years, how long did they stay? Much, 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 much longer. Because we're about to get into the story of Moses. So the question is, where should they have gone exceeding? Let me show you something in chapter 46 and verse 3 as we're closing this out. This is what it says. Remember at the beginning, this vision in Beersheba? I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. So it sounds like there was some multiplying going on there, but let's finish reading it. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again. It seems to me that God was saying to Jacob, it's okay to go down to Egypt for a season. This is my plan for you. In fact, I'm going to make of you a great nation, and it doesn't matter where you are, but I'm also going to bring you up again. I think it's insinuated while you're alive. He gave Jacob plenty of time to be alive, to go and weather out the famine in Egypt and Goshen, and even to have an impact on Pharaoh, and then to hightail it back to Canaan when it's over. They'd have been much better off in that situation. But I think they got comfortable in Goshen. Their possessions were great. They multiplied in a huge way. And that leads us right into this new Pharaoh's not going to know who Joseph is. They're not going to have the same connections they had. Oh, who are all these people? Hebrew people. How did they get here? There's 2 million of them. If they want to take us over, they could. Taskmasters, story of Moses in Exodus. See? Should have gone back to Canaan. All right? But that's going to be for another day to get into all that. All right. Well, thank you so much for your good attention today. We're so glad that you're tuning in. If you'd like to support our ministry, there is the website up on the screen there. So grateful for you being a part of what we're doing. Hey, put in the comments also where you're watching from. We love to see that and pray for you and your family. Thanks for being a part of all that God's doing in and through His Word, and for joining us this morning. All right, we'll see you next time. God bless you.